right. Thank you so much. Thank you, PA board members. Thank you, student representatives. Thank you, Councilman Wilson. And thank you to everybody in attendance today and for your comments. We appreciate the opportunity to come here this evening. We are asked to come and present about IMEA, who we are, what we do, what our relationship is currently with the city of Naperville and what that partnership entails. Today from IMEA, we have brought myself, Stacy Wilson. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs and Member Services. We've also brought Rakesh Kopkathu, who is our Vice President of Engineering and Energy Markets. He heads up all of our resource planning and the whole entire department. And then we've also brought our Vice President and General Counsel, Troy Folder. Rakesh and I are going to give the presentation, but we're all available for questions. So with that, I will kick us off. IMEA is a nonprofit municipal joint action agency. It's run by its members, including the city of Naperville. There are 32 communities throughout the state that are part of our joint action agency. Many years ago, in the early 80s, the municipals were finding it difficult to kind of go it alone. And to do, as the energy business got more complex and more difficult to navigate, they looked around at what other states were doing and how other munis were handling this kind of new world they were entering into. And so what they saw was that a national model is to form these joint action agencies. And so the towns gathered together and went to Springfield and lobbied the state legislature for the authority to form a joint action agency. And that is where IMEA was born. The city of Naperville has been receiving power from IMEA for roughly 15 years. And one of the benefits of the Joint Action Agency is you have a direct voice in the power supply through your board member. And I think this is something that's fundamentally misunderstood by a lot of the comments we've been hearing and everything, is that the way that IMEA works is that Rakesh, Troy, myself, we are staff. We bring expertise and we bring recommendations, similar to how your staff, city staff, brings expertise and recommendations to council, but ultimately the council, they are the decision makers in all of the decisions for the agency as a whole and for the resources and everything. We are staff, we bring the information, but ultimately our board members are the decision makers. And each city has a board member that represents their city. And for the city of Naperville, that's Brian Groth. And Naperville's been very involved in the agency throughout the years. So that's one thing that makes a joint action unique and one of the benefits. One of the other benefits is that we are made up entirely of municipally owned utilities. Again, we're nonprofit, so everything we do is to serve municipal owned utilities. We don't serve anybody else. They're our full-time customers. We work every day to deliver that reliable power at a cost lower than our peers. And really, we're looking to provide affordable, reliable, sustainable power. We're diversifying the way we supply it. We're investing in wind, solar, moving towards battery storage. We're going to talk more in depth about that in a minute. And significantly, we are well positioned to address any power demand growth expected in this coming decade. And our portfolio is really built to be able to keep bills low while we're looking to that future. One thing I did skip over, but I should mention, is that we are the highest financially rated power supplier in Illinois with an A+, AA-, and that is very important as we're a strong counterparty to secure any new resources. That becomes very relevant as we're trying to get new resources. So that's who we are. But we do more than just power supply. We also provide value-added, tailor-made services. And these services are really things that our municipalities have asked for and want to see. These are just a few of them. There's many more, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each of them. Instead, I'm going to highlight maybe 3 for our purposes tonight, but I'm happy to discuss any of them if you would like. The first one is electric efficiency incentives, as well as electric vehicle and infrastructure incentives. We have $1 million annual EE incentive program that we distribute to our municipalities based on a load ratio share basis. And so it works well to really, you guys have some local programs as well. And so taking our incentives, matching with your incentives really broadens the ability for those local energy efficiency programs. Same thing for the EV charger stations and the infrastructure there. For example, in FY 23 to 24, there's $145,000 that IMEA helped power roughly 300 new EV charger stations in the city. So that's one of the things that we do, and that's all built into our partnership. The other thing is the power supply scheduling. In our office, we have a 24/7 365, so every day, every hour, operations center. And they have built complex modeling. They really look at weather, they look at load, they forecast how much power is needed every 5 minutes because they work in the day ahead and in the real-time markets, which are on a 5-minute basis. And they're doing it in order to ensure the most economical power supply that you can have and to optimize your portfolio. And we really get pretty granular. I mean, we are very familiar with our towns, and you know, particularly some of the smaller towns. We know their large industrial customers. We know their work shifts and when the power is going to fluctuate based on that. And we know when some really large industrial customers take 2-week breaks during Christmas, right? I mean, we really try to really utilize and model to a way that that most types of services you may not receive with other entities. And then one other one I want to highlight on this particular slide is our work in the regional transmission organizations. You're going to hear a lot about RTOs, so apologize if you're already familiar, but the way I like to kind of describe RTO, or regional transmission organization, is I liken it to an air traffic controller, right? Air traffic controllers, they don't own the airplanes, they're not flying the planes, but they are in charge of making sure that those planes land at the right place at the right time, okay? And that's really what the RTOs do with regards to power. They don't own generation resources, they don't run generation resources, but they do have the rules and the markets and everything to make sure that those that the generation resources are powering when you need them to power, so that they are that you make sure the lights are on at all the time and the grid stays sustainable. So that's really kind of just a way to visualize what their job is. And to do that, they have an increasing amount of rules and regulations. They change on almost a weekly basis. And what IMEA does is we track those rules and regulations. We engage in the stakeholder process. And we do this in a way to best benefit your resources, and also to ensure that we're meeting all the requirements that they impose, and that you as a city are meeting all the regulatory requirements that they impose as well. So those are just a couple of the different services that we offer. So what has our board asked us to do, right? And they ask staff to view everything that we do through the lens of affordable, reliable, and sustainability, and we're gonna hit on those today. And when we're talking about affordability and reliability, we're talking about predictable costs. Municipalities, part of why they wanted a joint action agency was to share the risks, share the rewards. They also were looking for, you know, steady Eddie rates, right, as best as you possibly can. And the philosophy of our members has been to try to own your resources and have your own resources, because then you have a pretty best ability to manage your risks, okay? And the idea there is that you may not always be the very cheapest, but you are not going to be subject to these extreme market fluctuations that we're seeing, where you're going to be way higher than, you're not going to have these rapid increases. And that's part of what was going on when Naperville joined IMEA 15 years ago, or roughly 15 years ago. And so this really kind of shows it goes back to 2014. If you look at this chart, I'm going to break it down a little bit. The blue bars are the power supply costs. That's the part that we can control at IMEA. The red bars are the transmission costs. And you can see transmission costs are our largest increases that we've been having. And transmission costs are something that everyone has to pay, because the transmission you have to pay, it's basically your interstate highway, right, for power. You're paying to make sure that that power gets to your city gate. And so those are really a pass-through, and it doesn't matter which power provider you're with, or if you're with ComEd or whatnot, everyone has to pay transmission costs. So if you look at the black line across the way, going back to 2014, you can see that our power supply costs have been at or below, and we're actually well below what we were, well below today what our costs were in 2014 with regards to power supply. And we project that to continue going forward. So that, I want to also talk a little bit about, well, what is in our power supply and what do we own? And, you know, really we own a little bit of all of the above, right? We own solar, we own wind, we have ownership percentage in 2 coal-fired units, or coal-fired plants, excuse me. We have a couple of hydro facilities in a couple of our towns that we utilize for capacity, and we kind of own a little bit of everything. This is based on a name, this particular slide is a nameplate basis, so just for clarity, okay? And so we have 1,007 megawatts of resources. Of that, there's approximately 296 megawatts that are backup generations in our town, backup generation units in our towns. You don't have those here in Naperville. But the nice thing about those is that they aren't ran very often, but they do help us meet the capacity obligations imposed by RTOs. So that's one piece there. Of the 2007, we have 262 megawatts of carbon-free resources in our portfolio. So if you look at the pie chart there, that includes Prairie Wolf Solar, which is capacity. We have Lee DeKalb, which is 70 megawatts of wind. We have Green River, which is 50 megawatts of wind. We have Big River. Everything is named rivers and prairies. It drives me crazy, but that's what it is. We have Big River, which is solar. That's 25 megawatts. It's coming on in this June. And then also our hydro facilities, Royal River Hydro, and then we have several behind-the-meter solar plants in our communities. And then you can see in the hopper we have coming on 161 megawatts of resources under development. So of that, 150 megawatts is this new contract we just signed with B Hollow. It's through National Grid Renewables. And then we were really looking towards 3 more solar farms, smaller ones, approximately 11 to 13 megawatts in our communities. But we were doing those through the PACE loans, which is through USDA, which was part of the Inflation Reduction Act. So they're sort of in a hold status due to a lot of uncertainty at the federal level right now. But they are still, we're hopeful that they make their way through the finish line. This is really just a visual so you can see where the resources are geographically. These are only carbon-free resources. We didn't include everything here. And you can just visually get an idea of the geographics. And you can see right there, I don't have a pointer, but you can see that we also have the 1 megawatt facility here in Naperville as one of those. Okay, so that's what we have. Where are we going? And I think this is important. You know, our board worked together. They had a working group, and then they brought forward a sustainability plan. It was presented twice in full before it was voted on by the board in public meetings, and it has 5 principles to it. And the first one is to provide an affordable, reliable, and sustainable power supply to our member communities, to design and facilitate energy conservation programs, to offer flexible programs to mitigate peak loads, so you're really kind of looking at demand response and some other ideas there. Enable and accelerate and integrate electric vehicles and the charging infrastructure, and then maintaining a sustainable workforce. For purposes of tonight and for time purposes, I'm going to focus on the first one because I think that's what everybody seems to be focused on, is the sustainable power. But just so you know, we have the 2050 net zero vision, and the idea behind that, the roadmap, is to target reductions in greenhouse gases, and we're going to do that by increasing our renewable generation resources, particularly as we have resource contracts falling offline. So as our resources agreements, as they expire, we're going to be replacing those with renewable resources as the thermal ones expire. And then we are going to allow flexibility to embrace changes in the future. So battery storage is one, but it could be a multitude of innovations and that might come forward in the future, and we're positioned to take advantage of those, particularly as our debt gets paid off. And then we're going to continue and expand EE programs, and we're going to, we have demand response options. You actually take advantage of that. We have some of your customers that use it as well. But we're trying to get the program in a shape where more folks are interested in using demand response, and then advancing electric vehicles, which we already talked about a little bit. So inside that sustainability plan is this graphic. And really the first line focuses on how we were early adopters and what we've been doing to add renewable resources into our portfolio. The second line is sort of like where we're at right now. And then the third line there on the bottom talks about what the dates are that our current resources are going to be expiring, which is important in the conversation, right? So looking back at that top line, you can see that in 2009, we invested in a 70 megawatt wind project in Lee DeKalb. We were one of the first investors in wind. There were not a lot of investors in wind in 2009. We were really at the forefront in participating in wind project at that time. In 2016 and 2017, we put in 1.5 megawatt arrays. We did pilot projects in 2 of our towns, Rantoul and St. Charles. And at the time, I think they were the 3rd largest or 4th largest solar arrays. I mean, it's only, think back, that's less than 10 years ago. And that's so small. I mean, that's 1 megawatt versus now we've just signed 150 megawatts, right? So things have changed a lot, and we're moving with it. And then if you look on the middle line right now, we're focusing on trying to add more solar, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and then look and begin to try to figure out how to incorporate battery storage into the portfolio. And then lastly, you can see where we have some key dates that we're going to have to be confronting here fairly soon, some of them prior to the contract even expiring, prior to the IMEA member contract expiring. So in 2030, that 70 megawatts of wind in Lee DeKalb, that will expire at that time, that resource contract. In 2035, the Green River contract expires. In 2035 to 2038, we will have to reduce 45% of the CO2e emissions in Prairie State. That is current law. That is the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, CEJA, and we will meet CEJA. That is state law. There is no way we can do anything about that. That's what the law is. And then 2045, Prairie State will shut down under state law requirements, and then Trimble County 1 facility will be retiring. And then Trimble County 2 is expected to go offline according to PPL's, that's the corporate owner there in 2050. Just to give you a sense of the overall scope of how much that is, that's 91 megawatts, that final Trimble County, out of our 1,007 megawatt portfolio. I'm not going to dwell on this, but this was what is actually in the plan itself. And as part of that plan, the board, what they wanted to do is they said, let's make sure we have a long-term goal, right? We're going to have a goal, and our goal is 2050 net zero. And then in order to kind of make sure we're staying on target and we're not losing sight of that goal, we're going to put forward 1 to 3 year short-term actions. And then the staff has to report back to the board each year how we're doing on those short-term actions and whether we're meeting them or not, and if we're not, why not. And so that's really what the plan wanted to do, and that's what the board anticipates. Every 3 years, we're going to be going out and refreshing the plan, and we're going to reach out and do a stakeholder process with our member communities and our member board members to see what do you want the new plan to look like as we go to the next year. And I have one last slide before I turn to Rakesh here, but this was our recent report on that, and the goal number 1, again, was to provide affordable, reliable, and sustainable power supply. And the goal that the board had set was add 130 megawatts of solar, and then specifically within that, We're trying to get energized this Big River contract we'd entered into this year, and that will be occurring. And then we wanted to get 100 megawatts of solar, which is why it said 130, but we ended up finding a good project at a decent price for 150 megawatts, and so we did enter into that contract, and we anticipate that to be energized at the end of 26 or early 27. So I think it's important to note that most of these renewable projects are 20-year contracts, and so in order to enter into this, developers need certainty to borrow money, and the only way that we could enter into this contract is if we had enough members sign up for this contract extension. And since we did, and we do now have 25 members that have signed the contract extension, we were able to sign for this solar project. But had that not happened, we would not have been able to do that. We do have enough now members signed to be able to make that decision. And then we have 3 new member projects that are going in and will be going online this year in Princeton, Oglesby, and Marshall that total up roughly 2.5 megawatts. And last thing is that as far as battery, we met with multiple developers. We've developed the planning parameters of the study. We've put and just passed the money in the budget to go out and conduct the study, and we anticipate that being done by the end of the year. I'm going to turn it over to Rakesh, and then he'll update you on where we're heading with the plan.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Stacy. As Stacy explained, 2 guiding principles is the CEJA law, 2035 to 2038, where there's a requirement of 45% reduction, and then 2045, where there's a requirement of 100% reduction. That in addition to our net zero goal of by 2050. So what we did was, this is our view of where we see our load is, and try to match with the kind of resources that you really need in order to fit those needs. What you can see is our load is 1 gigawatt, which is fairly flat. And on the bottom line, below zero, is these are the retirements as we go through the timeline. As you can see, our peak, we are procuring resource much above peak load. It's because when you look at the thermal resources, you understand these are the resources that run 85% capacity factor, and you're trying to replace those with wind, which is roughly 35, solar, which is 20 and 25%. You ought to procure more to meet the needs to serve your load. So that's why this is all nameplate. When you look at this, even though your peak load is assumed to stay flat, but the kind of resources that you're procuring is much higher. The next slide is, I know this is a busy slide. This is pretty much from PJM. PJM is the RTO that puts in the rules and regulations of the grid. What this slide is basically saying is, I know, and the previous slide showed you the energy that is needed. Not only do you have to procure energy, you have to, you're obligated to buy capacity. Capacity is historically called steel in the ground, but moving forward, what RTOs did is, what is the probability of your resource that is helping the grid during critical needs? So what these are, the way you look at it is like, okay, if I have a solar, what is PJM telling me in this example is, if I have a tracking solar in 2034, 35, their view is there's 4% chance. Now, as you have seen, we have a resource of portfolio, including solar and wind, but for hypothetical example, Naperville peak is roughly 350, and if we were to only serve the peak with solar through this chart, what it's saying is you need to procure 25 times your peak to meet those capacity obligations. There are 2 ways you can meet your capacity obligation. One is, sure, your pool of, you can just buy it from market, or you have your resources in your portfolio that you try to offset. Again, it's a requirement for PJM. They buy all, sell all. Every utility in the country has to go through it. So as we go through this, again, onshore wind right now is 35%. As you go through 34, 35 time frame, it's 15%. Next is we just went through solar. Storage. Again, if you have a 100 megawatts solar storage facility of 4 hour, you're only going to get 56% of capacity accreditation. As we go through 34, 35, that number falls down to 38%. Nuclear, again, you can see that most of the thermal resources are flat. Part of the reason, I know nuclear is not dispatchable, but you have the ability to turn on and off to meet the grid needs during those conditions. Bee Hollow, we just went through a solar project here that Stacy went through that we are in the process of. It's already contracted, but if we were to, again, Bee Hollow is in MISO, but if we were to contract this facility in PJM, PJM would only give us a credit of 16.5 megawatts. So these are the type of challenges that you need to consider as you look into your resources. You need to satisfy not just energy, but capacity needs. Even on the energy side, what you have is RTOs have this administrative pricing. Whenever you need to have your resources when the grid is tight. If you don't, you will end up paying higher prices in your energy market. So those are the constraints, key constraints that you need to follow through during resource planning process. The next slide basically is, we just went through this. Basically, we took that ICAP curve and we assumed some of those decreasing trends in accreditation. As you can see, as we transition, battery becomes an increasing component as we try to do that. And it is critical. Again, this is our long-term view. Prior to any resource procurement, there will be multiple opportunities, including cost optimization, because there may be a scenario where we could just go and buy solar capacity, without all the additional, procuring energy and all the other things. So there are multiple ways we can continue to optimize this, but sitting here today, this is the view. I believe that's the view. This is the graph where basically we went through the ICAP, we went through the accreditation. This is the actual generation mix. As you look through the portfolio, I don't have battery in here. Battery only stores and discharges, so we did optimize battery already within the resource generation mix. If you look through the black line, there will still be times where your wind is not blowing and your solar resource is not producing when the time of need. So you will still have market purchases through the portfolio. Again, these could be either satisfied through market purchases or future carbon-free resources. With that, yeah.
We're just going back and forth a little bit here at the end. Real quick, I think one thing about that again, this is what we're planning with technologies you're looking at now, but the one thing we can tell you is it will not look exactly like that in 2050 because nobody can guarantee those things. But the way that the contract is structured is that I think one of the speakers said, well, these things aren't in the contract. That's correct. What's in the contract is the board makes these decisions. They make these planning decisions. They look at the economics of each of these decisions prior to it, and that voice is through that, right? So there's multiple times and points so for example, we just passed the Bee Hollow contract. We brought all that information. We talked about the prices. The board makes the decision. So it's part of the overarching plan. And one of the other things that puts us in a really good position is that the long-term debt is paid off in 2035 for our thermal resources. And so at that point in time, you have more flexibility and more room to be able to continue adding renewable resources into your portfolio. And talking about that reliability, and the reliability really is the fact that we're a nonprofit, have an obligation, you have an obligation as a city to serve your load, and we share that obligation to serve the load. And so for us, bringing that predictability is that reliability. And power marketers are for profit, and they don't have that long-term service obligation. Those are shorter-term options, right? And those are choices you're going to have to consider and think about. But that, from IMEA's perspective and what our board has directed us to do, is to plan for the long term, to be there to provide the needed power supply, the transmission arrangements, and the services. And we're going to be doing that well beyond 2035. But once that debt's paid off, rates are projected to significantly decrease because that will no longer be a component of your rates in 2035 going forward. Resource transitioning has started, and we're working now. I just talked about Bee Hollow. We've spent a lot of time talking about that National Grid project. That is the beginning of planning to replace our resources. We had if you look earlier in Rakesh's slide deck, we had exited a coal-based contract, and so we've already exited out of some coal, and this Bee Hollow is beginning to fill that up, right? And then the other thing is that we have some major choices coming up with 2030, with Green River, and some of those others. So that's why we're planning the resource planning now. Longer-term deals, these 20-year contracts with renewables are much better priced than if you're looking at a 10-year contract. And you need really longer runways for planning purposes to strategically plan for the future. It's really the key to determining your electricity needs. And I'm going to turn it over to Rakesh to kind of talk about those longer-term deals and what we've been seeing.
Thank you, Stacy. I know I talked about Bee Hollow a second ago. This is one of the solar projects that we recently entered into a contract. Even though that happened in 2024, the life of the project, you understood, the beginnings of the project actually begin in 2018. This is when preliminary site design, the vendors look for preliminary site design, and then you need to have site control. Without those two things, you can't even enter into the queue. Once you have those things, you enter into the queue. This is MISO. They did 3 rounds of studies. We are lucky that this project was in the front half of the queue. Story is much more different, you understood, for projects that entered here in the last couple of years in the queue. There have been significant delays. Long story short, I mean, this project is supposed to come online in 2027, but you understood some of the key ingredients, including the investment to enter into those land contracts and those things, investment needs to happen multiple years before. Again, this is one of the reasons, you understood, when there's so much risk for the developers, they tend to want to not only extract this. If you look at a developer, typical developer, when they put in 10 projects, let's say 3 or 4 of them are successful, they would like to recover all of that in that 3 or 4 successful projects. So when you're looking at such long-term investment, they do tend to want to have contracts much longer to recover those costs. Again, this is a hypothetical example. What we did was we took a 20-year solar PPA, and these are hypothetical numbers, and how it applies to your portfolio. When you convert that into 10-year, obviously the price is significantly higher, and the developers would like to recover more within the first 10-year period. What you are looking is if you don't go with the traditional 20-year portfolios and you try to ask for a shorter portfolio with restrictions, it is going to be expensive. And in this one scenario, as you can see, that's $96 million, you understood, over the first 10 period in additional costs. We were lucky when we went through this. This is one of the contingency options that we tried to talk with all the developers because we don't have contracts beyond 2035. Luckily, during this time, we had enough members sign up to where we didn't need any of those contingencies. Again, these are some of the challenges as we look through the portfolio. When we try to add resources, these are long-term resources.
All right, we're almost to the end. I know we've been a while, so I appreciate your patience. So a couple key things to close us out. And then, of course, fully open for all kinds of questions. One of the, in addition to the resources that IMEA is procuring, we are developing an option for members to procure additional renewables, and this can be local in your own community or connected to the Illinois grid. Right now, and we're calling this MDR, or member-directed resources. And right now, the way it's written is that it's limited to 10% of your peak demand. And that is a starting point. We call it kind of a can opener situation. It's a starting point. If it works for the portfolio and the board allows it, you can increase and have a higher percentage of MDR on a go-forward basis. So this resource, doesn't need to be in the city, but it does need to be in Illinois. The city would get full credit from the RTO that the generator is located in, with capacity and energy markets payments either in PJM or MISO. And that energy produced will be valued at the locational marginal price as determined by the regional market organization that generator is located within. So really, it sets it off in a way that you can have your own local resource, and it's set up in a way that it protects the other members and holds them harmless from costs and risks. Because overarchingly, we're a socialized agency, so these are sort of something we're allowing people to do kind of on their own, and if it works out well, then you guys share in the rewards, and if for some reason it doesn't work out great, then you take that risk as a city, but it's not shared with all the other members. And that's the concept, because everything else we do is in a socialized basis. But regardless of that, IMEA will manage that resource scheduling and market settlements on your behalf for your regional grid operators. We'll do all the scheduling and all of the back work that needs to be done. And in conclusion, Naperville's a valued partner with IMEA. We are a proven, low-cost, reliable supply partner. For 15 years, we have provided your power, and we have provided your residents with affordable, reliable power and services. We are committed to and on target to reach a net zero portfolio by 2050. As I mentioned, we offer a variety of value-added services tailor-made for your systems. So these are additional services to Naperville that you would need to, that would cost additional expenses if you were not with us. You would have to hire them out. But it is part of our relationship with the community and part of our overarching duties to have these resources, these services. And ones that you've used, I've talked about EE and all the market monitoring, et cetera, load forecasting, all of those types of things. And then one of the benefits that you have that really is unique is you have that direct voice in the decision making. We are nonprofit. Everything we do is for municipal utilities, and everything we do, every savings, all of that flows through to lower rates to your residents, and that makes us unique as well. And we believe that it's a good system, and we're happy that Naperville's a part of it. So appreciate your time, and we'll turn it over to questions if that's your desire.
Thank you very much for your presentation, your detailed presentation. And what I'd like to do before we start the questions from the PUAB members is to take a 5-minute recess, and then we'll start again.